Friends, welcome back to the Collectives Conversations podcast. We're having conversations at the intersection of faith and life. Today, I've got Pastor Ian Simkins on the show. He's the lead pastor of teaching and vision at The Bridge, just outside Nashville. If you're a Nashville person, then you know it's in Spring Hill. And he's also my second favorite black boxes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit on the Instagram. But let's talk first things first. You are a Detroit guy who then moved to the Chicagoland area, and then you're now in Tennessee. But as a guy who grew up in the Chicagoland area, we got to talk sports because Detroit and Chicago don't get along. How did you survive the hate, and it would have been hate, as a Pistons-Lions fan in the Chicagoland area? Okay. They forgot about it. Yeah. It was good for you guys. Yeah, I'm a diehard Bears fan. I grew up in the Chicagoland area. 84, 85, the Super Bowl Bears, I fell in love with the Super Bowl shuffle, all those things. And I think where we can find unity in the body of Christ is we both hate Green Bay. Right. Okay, see it a little bit. Yeah, I think we'd be in unity among there. But so then from Detroit to Chicago, then on to the beautiful Music City area in here in the South, and I'm not far, your neighbor of just about 2 hours away. Um, what was that culture shock for you? I know what it was a big culture shock for me, but what was that like, especially in the church, moving from the Midwest to a very Bible Belt, buckle the Bible Belt Southern situation? Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Did you get the like Southern like book of cuss words, like things not to say, like don't say bless your heart? Yeah. When we were talking off air, I came to Lee University in 1998, and I didn't know, like I understood South SEC football was a big deal, but I didn't know it was that big of a deal. And so people would greet one another if they were big hardcore Tennessee fans, and it was the Peyton Manning era. It was literally God bless and go Vols. Like that was the expression. And the V was more of a B, like God bless and go balls. Like and I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, please, and I had to get a translator. It was like speaking in tongues. I needed a translation. Um, and so it was culture shock. And you're right on the money. Like, it's not if you go to church, it's where you go to church. How have you, as a pastor, navigated that tension of, like, in the Midwest, it was like, can we get you to come to church? In the South, it's like, are you really a Christian? You say you go to church, but the faith element. So how have you sort of navigated that as a pastor? Mm, mm, yeah. So when you say moving them to deeper conversation or deeper understanding of the gospel, what's been some of the steps you guys took or were already in place when you got to the bridge to help sort of navigate overcoming that shallow Sunday expression into more of a deeper conversation? Hmm. 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 Yeah. 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 I love that concept. We talked former youth pastor off air, which I did that. Former church planner as well, planted a church and did that for a season. And I remember during that, and I've said this often, that there was as much ministry, especially early on, at our table as there was at the altar. Like, it was maybe more so sometimes. There was the difficult conversation or the discipleship development conversation that was happening. I believe in the altar and things that happen in that moment, but I think just as much can happen when we gather and have a deep conversation. So how is that practically being lived out at the bridge, or maybe just even in the Simkins family? Mm, Oh, cool. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Yeah. I remember reading some research a couple years ago on something like this, the timeline of how this developed, and I think we've gotten worse over the years. But when the television came into homes, we quit sitting on front porches, and then we went from carports to garages. We would open the door, close the door, and then we started fencing in our backyards for privacy. And all of a sudden, the people who we were engaging with always we'd cut off completely. We weren't even in privacy fences. We weren't even sharing a fence anymore. Um, and so I think we've created our own sort of insular bubbles. So going, I don't know why we're lonely, but I can tell you why you're lonely. Like you've made the bubble for yourself. Um, so how do we break out of our personal bubbles? You guys are throwing block parties, which I love, but how does somebody go? I don't even know their name. What's their first step to go? I'm going to move to get somebody to my table. Mhm. Right. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. 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 I haven't taken it that far. But I do annoy my kids because anytime we're at a restaurant, I make sure to get the name of our server because there's nothing worse than not using somebody's name when they're serving you or when they're, whatever. And it's not like, hey, you, like, because that's so inconsiderate, so unkind. And so I try to always get their name and refer to them by name and know their name. And now what's bad is we go to the same Mexican restaurant every Friday and every Sunday. So like now we're friends. Like my wife is so involved, she gets the family discount when she, like that's how in depth we are at our local Mexican restaurants. Maybe we should start praying for them. I don't know. Like we're blessing them considerably with every time we show up. Um but I think it's important knowing the people that are around you and knowing those who are serving you because I don't think you ever know without asking what somebody's walking through. And so maybe just being more aware. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. If you know anything about Cleveland, we are not over church. If there's something beyond over church, that's what we are. Like they're just an abundance. It's the home of a couple denominations. We have a large other. It's just, and when they say there's a church on every corner, I'm pretty sure that's true because if they're not an organized church, it's somebody's house. And like the church community here is not always known for being neighborly. And so especially restaurants, places of service. So I think it's something we can all take a little more patience with to really engage somebody that's at our table or anywhere, be it the grocery store or you just never know. Um, but I do want to say you're beyond Spring Hill. You're reaching the world with some deep conversations, and I said it early, jokingly. My second favorite black boxes because I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Natalie Runyon and Raise This Day. She is in my heart, the originator of the black box. But you've been doing it a while as well. What led you to take a very picture based platform and share deep theological content and words and challenging words at times? Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the world is seeking something authentic, like something true, right? We're sold to perpetually. Somebody's always selling, even in the Christian world, and it's not always a great thing. And I'm not criticizing anybody who also has a sponsorship or whatever. I know many podcasters and other platforms, they're like, hey, I love Jesus and Walmart is sponsoring this post, right? It's like, I'm like always at this tension. So I think the world, especially online, is looking for something real, something authentic, something honest and orthodox. Orthodoxy, I think, is getting lost somewhere in the creativity, and then just in bad theology and a lack of biblical understanding. So, what has been other than the helping people, which I understand that as an Enneagram too, um, that it's most of those pastors are Enneagram twos or Enneagram ones. We're trying to lead or help people, I think, so somewhere in that space. But what has been sort of for you the push? Is it as much a place of processing? Is it a place of help as you post these? Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I love this idea of practitioner. And I'm going to push on a little bit because I also looked at the list of people you read or you think are thought leaders. And as a quasi academic, I know most of those names, but the average Christian probably isn't reading those people or connecting with those people. So, how have you personally, and then in pastoral work and in your social media work, held the tension of being thoughtful and academic, and practical and a practitioner. Because I think if I'm, and again, I don't want to overstep, but I think you come from a Christian Missionary Alliance background, right? Which is of the same, a similar background as I come from, Church of God, Pentecostal, those type things. We're not known for being smart people, typically. Like, I'm just going to call my tribe out. I'm going to call my tribe out. We're not typically academic, right? Um, so how have you wrestled this sort of tension of being both thoughtful and academic in what you do and say, and practical? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said something that in a lot of the world is very dangerous, like to surround yourself with people different than you, who don't think like you do, don't vote like you do, aren't ascribing to certain ideologies that maybe you ascribe to. In a time where we're entering an election season, how are you handling what seems like another very divisive time in culture? How are you, and again, put it in light of this table conversation that you're like, hey, let's gather around the table, and knowing that as I gather at Thanksgiving, no matter who I voted for and who I didn't vote for, there's going to be conversation about who we did and didn't vote for. How are we helping people navigate how whatever the outcome is? Mhm. Yeah. Right. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and I love if you go back to where we started the conversation earlier. We talked about the table and Jesus, and you're reading the Gospels through the lens of the table. Um, there were a lot of people at the table Jesus didn't agree with, like 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 and people who didn't agree with one another. Like you talk about, like, when he has the religious leaders, he's got Sadducees and Pharisees who have differing views on resurrection, and Jesus is saying, I am the resurrection. So you have three different views of resurrection at the table, and you got a bunch of people at the table who are going like, I'm not sure where I land on resurrection, I'm just trying to hear for the meal. Like, I think there's this whole lens we can read through and go, Jesus modeled some of this, and this is, and again, it's socio-political. Like the gospels are very socio-political in the sense of like religious leaders and who's in charge, and to see that Jesus was kind of going, we can have some hard conversations, and I can love you the same, and still show you love and care and kindness. Yeah. Right. Hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. I think there is something, and I think we have to prepare our hearts to be able to navigate it, because, to borrow common language, something's going to trigger you. You're going to get upset by something or somebody. So I think there's a sense of being, having a guarded heart in those things, and having a lot of grace for people who don't agree like you, or don't agree with what you think with an ideology, because I think it's, bipartisanism is like almost like polar opposite world. Like, to be in the middle somewhere is somewhere almost impossible. Um, mm, mm, yeah, yeah, right. That was saying, hey, can we pause right there? You made a Lion King reference with the Return of Jesus reference. I mean, we have to take a moment and just acknowledge the genius of what just happened there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we have to get in front of one another somehow. I think seeing, again, the Imago Dei, the humanity of somebody else, makes it a whole lot easier, or a whole lot harder for them to be my enemy. In when I see that you have 3 kids that are looking up to you, or whatever the narrative may be, that I see that there's flesh and blood and bones in who you are, it's harder to hate you. Um, it should be, at least. If not, then we have to really check our hearts somewhere in if we're being Christ-like. Mhm. Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I had to write that down. I'm about to read that book now, The Anxious Generation. I love Next Gen. I love young adults especially. But you're right on the money. Like, they don't know how to have a conversation. They don't know how to have engagement face to face. It's like, so like like they will stand, and this is what I love about them. They will join a picket line, they will join a protest, but can't ask for ranch dressing. Like they've a causationalness to them, but like they can't go advocate for themselves for more mustard. Like, it's just incredibly weird tension. And so I think you're right. We have to get face to face. My wife and I made a rule in our marriage early on that we can at any point take a conversation offline or pause the conversation. We're having a text conversation, and it's one of those things that, like, we can't talk about this over text because we can't see the emotion of the other. We can pause that conversation and go, this conversation is tabled so we're in the same room together. Because a text has no inflection, it has no emotion attached to it that you can read. And so I think I would love to see that rule applied to more people in their life, going like, hey, I'm willing to have this conversation offline, because then we can have an actual conversation. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Right. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've not been brave enough to do it, and I probably should. But a neighbor of yours, I say neighbor kind of loosely, Darren Whitehead down in Columbia. I think they're in Columbia or Franklin, Church of the City, Franklin. Yeah, he wrote a book and has his church do a 40-day digital fast, and I've just not been like I've not had the courage to do it. And this is not what it is. It's really like I have to be courageous enough to know that I'm going to go through a detox and it's like a drug and I got to get off it. And I've just not been able to go like, yeah, I need to do that. But I also know, yeah, I probably need to do that. you know. So mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. right. James Clear. Yeah, Atomic Habits. Love that book. Yeah, and maybe that's a starting point. And I know we didn't mean to get in this digital conversation, but I think maybe that's a starting point for all of us is uh, how do I make micro habits and begin to stack them to move them away from being device heavy life that we are and things like that. So I want to kind of get here because I know just from tracking with you, you have a love of scripture. How are you at the bridge helping battle the sort of this biblical illiteracy issue we face? Mm, that's good. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Mm. Right. Yeah. 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 I think as a communicator, I've had to recontextualize myself sometimes because where we used to be able to make assumptions people knew the stories, they no longer do. Like they don't know David versus Goliath. You used to be able to assume they knew the outcome, but they don't. You know, they don't know about Moses or Noah or whatever. Like the assumptions we used to start with, we can't start with anymore. Um, because they're biblically illiterate, and biblically unknowledgeable in general. They're just unfamiliar now. I think I heard somebody say people are more biblically unfamiliar than illiterate at this point. Like they just don't know the stories. Um, so a friend of mine told the story. Uh, I forgot who it was, but he was preaching on David and Goliath, and he wasn't preaching the traditional David and Goliath outcome, but he was preaching somewhere afterwards. And he goes, "Well, you know what happens at the end of the story." And he said he had a young believer in his church who comes up and he goes, "Pastor, what happens to the Goliath guy?" Like he didn't know, right? And so we have to be aware of that piece too. Like they may not know, right? Because they didn't maybe grown up in church or not heard the story or whatever. So I think just to make sure we're contextualizing well as communicators is important in that conversation too. Hmm. Oh, right, right. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great place to land. I got one final question, Ian. I ask everybody who comes on the show. It is called the Collective's Conversations. So, who is one person, historical, present day, fictional, or in your real life that you want to sit down and have a conversation with? Okay, give us both. Okay. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, those are both great options. I would have never said Keith Moon, but I think it would be a fun conversation. So, um, yeah, I think we've had some unique ones because Jason Romano was on one to have a conversation with John Lennon and Paul McCartney from the Beatles, like because of that whole like that 6-year span. So 60s and 70s rock and roll people are super interesting to talk to. I think we can settle there. So Ian, thank you. Thanks for hanging out with us. Make sure you guys give him a follow. It's at Ian Simkins, right? Is your Instagram. My second favorite black boxes. And as we always say on the Collective's Conversation, you got to see at the table. Thanks for being on. Wow, what a great conversation that was. Thanks for joining us in the conversation. If something from the conversation really stood out to you, would you share it and tag me on social media at Jeff_Pitts_ on Instagram? And we would love it if you would rate and review and subscribe to the show. That just helps us reach more people with these great conversations. And as we always say, you've got to see the table. Thanks for joining the conversation.